That was a question I never thought I would ask. It was my first day at the Keski B-137 mining station. After a quick tour of the facilities, Supervisor Gorick concluded, "And that would be the main thing. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask me or any of my colleagues. For now, leave your lunch in the dining room and look for me in the warehouse to give you your equipment," he said, clicking his jaws and moving his antennas in a gesture that he had learned was cheerful before going ahead to the warehouse. I raised my vestigial appendages, palms facing forward, and blinked twice with the third eye in the center of my forehead as a confirmation response. I approached the dining room refrigerator to store my Vintrax worms, a traditional food from my planet. They must be eaten alive, and if I want them to survive until lunchtime, they must remain fresh. But when I put them away, I noticed something strange. At the back of the refrigerator, there was a small metal box with a padlock and marked with hazardous material warning labels. That puzzled me. What was a box with hazardous material doing in the kitchen? Not only that, but in the refrigerator with everyone's food. For a moment I was worried, but then I thought with some logic. The supervisor and the others seemed quite professional. Obviously, they couldn't have something dangerous next to the food. It must be some kind of inside joke or even a hazing since I'm the newbie. I calmed down, but I was curious to know who had the idea. I headed to the warehouse where Supervisor Gorick was waiting for me, talking to one of the miners. It seemed like a casual conversation. He was a human, a little taller than me, although shorter than the average for his species. When the human saw me, he smiled widely. For an instant, my instincts screamed at me to back off. In my world, showing your teeth is a clear threat. But I remembered that for humans, it was a sign of kindness. Still, I couldn't help my third eye blinking nervously. If he noticed my discomfort, he was kind enough not to mention it. In any case, he offered me his hand, a traditional human greeting. I took it with one of my upper hands, the strong ones. His fifth finger felt strange at first, but once again, either I managed to hide it, or he simply decided not to mention it. When he was satisfied with the greeting, he let go of my hand and introduced himself. "Hello, you can call me Julian. Julian Montes at your service." "It's a pleasure. You can call me Kuropi. It will be a pleasure to work with you." "I'm sure you will," the human replied with a smile that made the gesture look definitely not threatening. "Here is your equipment. Put it on and confirm that it is the right size," said Supervisor Gorick, clicking his jaws with excitement. I put on the work equipment. It definitely fit me well. "It's perfect." "Excellent. Any questions before we start with the hard work?" Supervisor Gorick sounded especially excited with that last sentence. "Come on, stop harassing the new guy. If he has a question, he'll come find you. There's work to do." The human intervened with what I assumed was a joking tone. "How many times did you ask him if he has questions? 4 or 5 times? Be honest." The supervisor moved his antennas in embarrassment. "Well, actually," I said in a timid voice, interrupting the conversation. The supervisor and the human looked at me in unison. The human seemed a little surprised, and the supervisor stood up straighter in an arrogant posture. "Go ahead and ask," he said, snapping his jaws in the most blatant tone of "in your face" that I had ever seen. "Well, I can't help but notice that in the dining room refrigerator there is a box marked as hazardous material." The supervisor snapped his jaws in a high-pitched tone, his species equivalent of a smirk. The human, for his part, seemed annoyed and just lowered his gaze, pinching the bridge of his nose, and sighed with tiredness. "No tengo tiempo para estas pendejadas," he mumbled under his breath in a language the universal translator didn't recognize. "I'm leaving. I have work to do. Welcome to Team Kuropi," the human said in an annoyed tone, far from his initial joy. "Was it something I said?" I asked, confused. "It's not you, it's a delicate subject for him," the supervisor said thoughtfully. "So what's in the box?" I said with growing curiosity. The supervisor was silent for a few seconds, his antennas moving slowly, as if he were reflecting. Finally, he answered, "I'd better tell you everything. With the full context, it will make more sense." He paused before continuing. Before you took this position, there was a duration named Drasak. Do you know them? Yes, a rather ancient race. Huge lizards with 6 legs and 4 arms with an imperialist past until... Oh, I see you know. Yes, they tried to expand into human territory. Let's say the duration had his own opinions regarding that conflict and made sure Julian knew it. I managed to calm the violence, but the resentment remained. It became more subtle, with small, supposedly harmless jokes that sought to incite a fight, which slowly exhausted Julian's patience. I managed to convince him that if he gave him the pleasure of fighting, then he would win. For a while that worked. The jokes stopped. They didn't get along, but at least there was no need to watch each other, so they didn't kill each other. But the peace didn't last long, just a couple of weeks, until the duration made his big heist. He ate his lunch. "And that's it?" I said with disappointment. "Is that all?" "Look, kid, humans are an unpredictable species. Julian is calm, yes, but like most of his species, he's a time bomb waiting for someone to set it off. And if there's one thing he doesn't tolerate, it's messing with his food, his favorite time of day. If you're going to interrupt him, it better be important." And for some reason, Drasak thought eating his lunch was the motivation Julian needed to fight him. And to be fair, he wasn't wrong about that part, although I doubt he expected what happened next. "Wait, is that his lunch? Is the hazardous material in the refrigerator the human's lunch?" I said, more scared than I intended. "Clever boy, let me tell you what happened. I think that day brought tacos. Yes, it was Thursday. His Taco Thursday? The human insists on using his own calendar. He knows the standard galactic calendar, but he refused to use the names unless it is mandatory. Anyway, the taco, a very popular human food, even among other species, except the herbivorous ones, obviously. But he also had something else. A special sauce made by himself. Maybe you've heard about the fame that humans are exceptionally resistant to various toxins. Let me tell you that it is 100% true. That sauce he mentioned was a cocktail made with a very high concentration of an irritating substance extracted from native plants of the earth. I think I remember that habanero was the main ingredient. In a later interview, Julian himself admitted that it was so concentrated that very few humans would dare to try it, and he compared the substance to drinking fire. I felt my antennas rise. I stood in disbelief, and a chill ran through my body. Humans are crazier than I thought. What kind of species ingests toxins on a regular basis and enjoys it? Why? Why would anyone do that? I said, completely unable to understand what line of thought would lead someone to do such a thing. The supervisor spoke calmly. I asked him the same thing, and his answer was, "Interesting." "What did he say?" I asked impatiently. "If you want to know, he said that. Human culinary philosophy boils down to, if it's not lethal, it's food, and if it's lethal, eat with care." I paused for a moment to process the implications of that statement before returning to the main topic. But then what happened to the duration? Right, he almost forgot. When lunchtime came, we found him on the dining room floor, burning with fever, drenched in sweat and struggling to breathe. He needed to be rushed to the hospital. He was lucky. They pumped his stomach as an emergency and managed to stabilize him. But to my surprise, Julian was more than willing to kill him with his own hands. Between me and other workers, we managed to calm him down so he wouldn't do anything stupid. Graziano was hospitalized for 2 weeks, half of that time in an induced coma, by the way, which gave Julian time to calm down. I told him that when Drasak recovered, he would be fired. He just said that I should have done it a long time ago. He was right. But my hands were tied. I won't bore you with bureaucracy. Let's just say that he knew someone. Continuing with what happened, the Graziano left the hospital and resigned himself, but not before making it clear that he never wanted to see Julian again for the rest of his life. Naturally, Julian gave him his best smile and said, "Your wish is my command," and then pointed out the exit. And that was the last time we saw him. Julian had a permanent smile the following days, until he paused inside. The superiors summoned him. They clarified that the incident was not his fault, and that he would not be reprimanded for it. But to prevent similar incidents in the future, from now on he had to mark both his lunch and the sauce container as hazardous material. He did not agree. He tried to argue, but he was determined. Finally, he gave in reluctantly. And that was what happened. Supervisor Gorick leaned closer to me and whispered, Between you and me, he did pretty well. After analyzing his sauce, it was determined that it could very well be classified as a chemical weapon, but the higher-ups preferred not to make a bigger deal of it and to end the matter as soon as possible. I was stunned for a couple of seconds before I could say something, and they don't care that Julian is so upset. Nonsense, Supervisor Gorick said, snapping his jaws in amusement. He'll eventually get over it. Don't be surprised if in a couple of weeks he's telling the story himself with a smile on his face. He clamped his tweezers shut with a thunderous sound. Okay, story time is over, time to get to work. After that day, I understood two fundamental things about working with humans. First, never underestimate their ability to weaponize food. And second, never, ever touch their lunch.